There are 5 things that I would do differently if I could start my own company over. For context, I started a tech startup 10 years ago. We did 500 startups, we raised venture capital, we grew our team to 35 people, we crossed $10 million of revenue in 2021, and we're still here. And by all means, that's success, but it is also a failure. Like, we haven't exited for millions of dollars, we're not a unicorn yet, and in our industry, that's actually pretty bad. But I think it connects to my very first mistake, which is that we raised money too early. We started Slidebean in 2013. We started with literally no money. I was coming off of a previous failed startup and I was in a lot of debt. And then this idea to build Slidebean as an AI presentation tool, this had been swirling around my head before that company went down. And as soon as we closed shop, I wanted to get in on this new idea. But I couldn't really do it without a salary. I didn't expect the new company to pay for my debt, but I needed some form of income. So we raised a little bit of money. You could call this a pre-seed round from friends and family investors, which I would not do again. This was money raised in a bit of a desperate situation, like in order to pay ourselves something. It wasn't a lot of money, but the fact that we needed it so badly gave us no leverage to get better terms, and it cost us a lot of equity. My co-founders weren't in debt, but they also needed some form of salary when we got together in order to commit to the company. So on a new run, what I would have done is self-fund this first iteration of the product so that we can raise money with a product built, let's call it a seed round, and not just an idea. That is not easy. But it is the path that a lot of successful companies have taken. Think about it. It's a group of co-founders that get together, they commit a certain amount of time to the company, and they use their savings or maybe some side hustle, maybe they don't quit their day jobs, and they use that to get by. They make progress on the product, maybe not to launch it, but at least some prototypes and at least some customer conversations.
That is our first dollar.
By the way, it's impossible to do this unless you can do this stuff in-house. This is why I'm very much against outsourcing early product development or early marketing, because it's just so expensive. Instead of doing that, you need to use that time to build these team relationships, to learn, to figure out the skills that the co-founders may still be missing, and then find the team members that would cover them. We built and launched a working MVP for a few $1,000s, honestly, which we ended up paying to ourselves in salary, and we learned a ton. Now, part of that early pre-seed money for us also came from startup accelerators, which was good and bad. You need a couple of pieces of context to get this full picture. And the first one is that I'm Costa Rican. A lot of people don't know where Costa Rica is in a map. It's here, and it's not an island, and it's not Puerto Rico. That is also an explanation on why I could survive on a $1,000 a month salary. The point is, when the investor you're talking to only thinks of your home country as a vacation spot, then it's a lot harder to convince them on your capacity to build a unicorn. Moreover, and more critically, I didn't really know any investors, so we ended up doing 3 startup accelerators: Startup Chile, Dream It, and 500 Startups. And yes, in part this was because we desperately needed some pre-seed money, but part because of our lack of network. Like, I wouldn't do this again now. I wouldn't do 3 accelerators again now, because I've already built that network and I already hopefully have built some credibility. But for 25-year-old me, I do think this was the right call. Like, it did cost us a lot of equity early on, but it fast-tracked me building a network in a country where I didn't belong. The second thing I would do differently is hiring pseudo co-founders as our early team members. In part because we had left so much equity on the table. We were very careful with the first employees and giving them stock options. We were paying them, I think, close or very close to market salaries, and we did give them some stock options, but we went out on a hunt for employees. We were recruiting employees, not rock stars, not pseudo co-founders. I think that the early team should be almost as strong as the co-founding team, which means, of course, taking your sweet time to find each one of them. If I had to do it again, and because this second time I was more careful with my equity, I would give them a lot more stock options in the company. Because remember, stock options are only really valuable if the business increases in value. And that's why you give out options and not actual common shares. We have a whole video explaining the difference between these two and why you always want to do stock options and not common shares. That, to me, would serve 3 main purposes. One is getting people to really put up the extra mile because they'd have a direct cash benefit from the success of the business. 2, it would make us founders much more selective about hiring. And 3, it would have retained them a lot longer. My co-founders and I lived and breathed Slidebean during these early years, but I think we would have gotten a lot farther if we had 3, 4 people who operated almost at a similar level. By the way, you want to make sure that one of those people runs your operations. That's your salaries and your legal and your compliance. It's such a distraction, and it took me so long to finally hire someone to delegate it to. Also, in our case, many of those early employees didn't stick around for too long, or maybe didn't have the experience to take on a leadership role or an executive role in the future, and to actually offload tasks from us founders, which is what those first employees, I think, should do. The next thing I would do is giving up sooner, which sounds completely counterproductive, but here's the extra context. We founded Slidebean as a PowerPoint killer in 2013. We started by focusing on pitch decks, which worked, and by 2017, we had almost $1 million in annual run rate. But then we stalled. We raised venture capital, we raised a seed round of almost $1 million, but we couldn't really raise any more money after that. That means that, at least in part, we failed. I'm not a millionaire. We are not a unicorn. We didn't get acquired for some crazy dollar amount, which is more or less what our investors expected to happen. So we went from presentations to pitch decks to AI pitch decks, and then we added financial models, and more recently, this media business on top of that. And today, 10 years later, we operate very much as a bootstrap business. But the fact that we're still in business, a decade in, surviving the startup purge of 2023, well, I think some people might call that great success.
A great success!
You needed that context to understand my point on giving up sooner. We spent years and years trying to fix the problems that this original product, the PowerPoint killer, had. And most of that went to waste. We were able to afford all of that time because we operated very lean. A good part of our team is still in Costa Rica, so it was a lot cheaper to operate and to do R&D and development. And because we figured out bootstrapping. But sometimes, and actually most times, you shouldn't do that. For years, I had this burden over my shoulders that I can't fail my investors, that I need to do right by them because they helped us get off the ground. They are my first and only investors in companies that I founded, and I can't let them down, right? Well, I realize now that this way of seeing things comes a bit from my culture, my upbringing, but after being around US startups for so long, I've learned that that's not how things work at all. And whatever the US does at startups, it's working. Investors do expect you to give everything you've got to this company, but your company is, after all, an investment for them. And it's a risky one, and risky investments often fail. And that's okay, and good investors should learn to live with that. Part of the US startup culture is learning that failure is good, giving up quickly enough, and then starting over with a ton more experience. That's a very different idea to get in your head, especially if you didn't grow up in that culture. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my job today. I am very excited about what we're building, but my point is, maybe we should have called it quits and started over. And if we had, who knows where we'd be? Actually, the only reason why we're still here 10 years later is because thanks to what we built, we've been able to fund new stuff, including dipping our toes on YouTube. Honestly, it's like new startups in the end, with less risk and yes, with the same investors as the original startup. But doing that required us to give up, to understand that for whatever combination of reasons, the original product that we set out to build didn't work. What I'm saying is, don't be afraid to pull the plug on things. Like, it may not be the entire company, but satellite products, features, initiatives, more often than not, they end up being just distractions. Just like running out of money is the limit to your startup's life, set time limits to these products and these initiatives and these features. As part of our giving up on this original product, we've learned that we could launch a bunch of new things, whole new products even, but we always force ourselves to make them work on a time limit. And if they don't, we just pull the plug on them. This leads me to point 4, which is removing distractions, focusing on just one thing and doing that one thing right. And once you get that thing, once you understand it, once you can repeat it regularly, you can find someone to delegate it to, and then you can move on to a next task. I avoid having multiple complex tasks to solve in my head. I avoid that like the plague. And that's the way I've operated for years, and the way I encourage other managers to operate inside the company too. Think of those senior employees as a type of team member that can build a process from scratch, own it, but then delegate it to someone else and start over. And that may be a marketing channel, it may be a feature inside the product, it may be an internal process inside the company. Just focus on perfecting that one thing so that you can offload it and get rid of it from your brain completely. Now, the last tip I'll give you is the best, but also the corniest, which is forgetting about the destination. Like, I used to daydream about my exit check.
I gotta do it, man.
seeing millions of dollars in my bank account, I would pull all-nighters because I felt that it was just one step closer to that goal. And it might have been, but if you only think about that goal, I think that you miss out on the journey. I spent the first 2 or 3 years working too hard, working too many hours. That created conflicts with my co-founders. It created distance with my family. But I think that, looking back, the journey can be quite fun. It fucking sucks sometimes. But if the sucking times are the exception, I think that means that you're on the right track. To me, that's very much connected to team culture. I can make a whole video about team culture if you want, but to me, team culture has been one of the most crucial parts that has kept me working happy and enjoying the journey at Slidebean for so long.
In the end, life and business are about human connections. And computers are about trying to murder you in a lake.
Because startups fail all the time. Chances are that your company will fail. But I think that you need to be able to look back on the time that you spent running this company and enjoy it. Don't burn yourself out. Respect your free time. Take at least 1 day off every week. Completely off. And sometimes that doesn't make a lot of sense because there's so much urgent stuff happening, but do it. I hate running. I hate exercising overall, but I think this metaphor, I have to keep going back to it, which is running a startup is a marathon and it's not a sprint. And you need to keep energy for the long run. See you guys in the next one.